To All the Girls I've Loved Before is the 17th episode of the 6th season of Cheers. This is directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And it's a fantastic episode. I actually have quite a lot of notes, so this may take a while, but hopefully it doesn't take too long to go through. But I adore this episode, partly because there are some great moments, but also just I love Lilith, I love Frasier, it's brilliant. Starts off with the opening with Carla going into Rebecca's office to feed her twins, and she suggests using Rebecca as a decoy. Bit of an awkward introduction, but not too bad. And then the main narrative starts, and we only have one full narrative in this episode, which is absolutely not a problem. There's a lot of substance there. It carries itself really, really well. And this is, of course, the fact that Lilith and Frasier are soon to be married. And Rebecca and Sam are now going to be their maid of honour and best man. Lilith asking Rebecca, beautifully written, very funny. And Frasier ends up getting a bachelor party. And I think it says a lot about his relationship with Lilith, because Sam says, as your best man, do you want me to throw you a bachelor party? And Frasier turns to Lilith and says, what do you think, darling? Would I like a bachelor party? And Lilith's response, I will not deprive you of the experience, immature though it might be. And the bulk of the episode is the bachelor party, and we'll talk about that when we go through it. Rebecca then realises she's the maid of honour, she should probably do something for Lilith, and Lilith seems quite happy with the idea of having a get-together. And she says to Rebecca, I wish there was some way I could repay you, Rebecca. If you ever need to admit a family member to an institution, I can certainly speed up the paperwork. I have to say, that's a pretty decent way to repay somebody. Helping with their mental health and getting things moved through the system more quickly. That's not a bad trade-off. Frasier then makes a couple of derogatory remarks about marriage. He's not necessarily meaning them, he's just having a bit of banter with the guys. But Lilith's really thinking a lot about what he's saying, and basically gives him an opportunity to back out of the wedding. And she told him, call me if you still want to go through with this. And she does end up waiting for his call, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. We then get to the bachelor party, and it does take up a decent chunk of time. And it's basically a bunch of guys hanging together at Cheers, talking about women. They're talking about if they could have anybody, who would they have. Frasier very cleverly said Lilith as his first answer. We're in the main room, and then we're in the pool room. Definitely helps to keep things moving in terms of pacing by just slightly switching up the location. And then Sam kind of suggests to Frasier that maybe Lilith told him to call her if he's changed his mind, because she's changed her mind and was trying to let Frasier down easily. I never read that into what Lilith said. That was never my interpretation. But it does put a seed of doubt in Frasier's mind. He very briefly gets some respite from thinking about that, because a stripper comes in, a stripper called Karen, played by Karen Lorre. Turns out it's one of his patients, which was pretty funny. And then the party kind of calms down a little bit after that. Karen leaves, and the atmosphere is definitely a little flatter than it was. And we get a Diane mention. Always makes me happy when we get Diane mentioned, although it's not in the happiest context, because Frasier does say, when Diane left me at the altar, well, there was a tiny voice that kept saying, you're off the hook, you're off the hook. As much as I love Diane, yeah, I feel like Frasier probably did get off quite lightly there. I love her, but she's probably not the easiest to live with. And I say that as somebody who is unfortunately very much like Diane in a lot of ways. And Frasier, thinking about this, decides to ask the gang and everybody else who's there, truthfully, what they think of Lilith. And he does ask them for complete honesty, and that gives Cliff the chance to kind of go off on one about Lilith and mentions all of these negative things. And then Sam talks about all of the positives of single life. And I don't necessarily agree with everything he said. He said about marriage, that's what you're losing, your freedom. I can eat donuts for dinner if I want to. I'll be honest with that. I feel like if you're married, you should still be able to eat donuts if you want to. I don't think being married dictates your diet. Yes, having shared meals is brilliant, but the idea that you have to eat the same thing as the person you're married to for every single dinner is a little bit disturbing. So I don't agree with Sam's points, but it definitely is planting this seed of doubt in Frasier's mind, and he admits that actually he's genuinely having doubts. So he decides to phone Lilith, not to say the wedding's off, but he just wants to talk to her. And Carla answers. We can hear this loud party in the background, and Carla mentions that there's a male stripper there, and that Lilith will phone her back later. Phone him back, rather, phone Frasier back. And when Frasier puts the phone down, he gets really, really frustrated at the thought of Lilith being around this male stripper, and he gets so agitated that Sam throws a drink in his face. The execution of that is fantastic. I don't know if it was a one-take shot, but it is brilliant. And after a couple of seconds, Frasier just says, quite calmly, "Creme de menthe? You couldn't find some water?" And just the delivery of that line and kind of how flat it was. There was not a lot of emotion when he said that. It was just so brilliant, and I absolutely loved it. And he realizes, and I think it was pretty obvious, but he realizes that his response was jealousy. And that was enough for him to realize that actually he does love Lilith and he does want to marry her. So jealousy is a really negative emotion, but here we see it actually having some benefit, that it helped Frasier realize just how he felt and just how much he cared about Lilith. And unfortunately for Cliff, that meant Frasier was ready to get some payback for all of the negative things Cliff had said about Lilith, which is not fair, because in Cliff's defense, Frasier did demand complete honesty. And I feel like out of all of the regular gang at Cheers, Frasier and Cliff are the last two I'd expect to see conducting a decent fight. And they kind of walk around in their circle with their fists up, and they end up sitting down at a table, writing down all of the places they can't hit. It doesn't go ahead. Before they get a chance to progress with the fight, Lilith comes in with Randy the stripper. And she's declaring she's getting married to Randy, and she says, and I quote, "If anybody wants to get us a wedding gift, his butt is this size." And she demonstrates with her hands. And it's just an unusual display from Lilith. It's not the kind of Lilith we're used to, which I think really helped to make it entertaining. And it is unclear, in my opinion, exactly what's going on, but we do find out quite quickly once she sat down with Frasier that she behaved the way she did, partly because she was drunk, but also because she was feeling like she had to get back at Frasier, because she had been waiting for him to call. And he never called. Well, he did, but Carla kind of didn't relay the message. So clearly Lilith was panicking that Frasier was having doubts because he didn't call her. But also, I feel like the promise was to call him after the bachelor party. So it was unreasonable of her to actually expect him to have called during the bachelor party, because she did say, once you've finished with all of that, give me a call. And he hadn't finished yet. So her declaring that she was getting married to Randy was far too premature, but clearly it was bothering her a lot as well. And the wedding's going ahead. We'll, of course, discuss that when we get there. And then we have the final scene, and we have a terrible, eye-rolling, ridiculous, dumb joke that I absolutely love. Everybody's getting ready to leave, and Norm says, "I promised Vera I'd pick up some Chinese food. Well, I spilled it on the floor this morning." It's such a stupid joke, and I loved it. I found it very funny. And everybody's leaving to go to their wives and their partners, and then Cliff says he's married to the US Postal Service. And then for a good couple of seconds, we just have Sam alone. And then Rebecca comes in alone. And they both decide to go off and get coffee together. And I rather enjoyed it. However, I will say I don't completely agree with the message there, because they're both talking about how it's brilliant to be single and that being with somebody has all of these drawbacks and having the single life is the best thing. And then at the last minute, they both realize, no, it's not good. Let's go and have coffee so we're not alone. I love the fact they're there for each other, but I also don't agree that you can't be happy on your own. So I don't love the message that they both had to go and have coffee at whatever time of night just to avoid being on their own. But I do love the fact that they're there for each other. So not a bad way to end things. It's a great episode. Really fabulous episode. A lot of really strong moments. Highlights. I think the highlight for me would have to be Frasier, or the delivery of the line creme de menthe, you couldn't find some water. I just thought it was fantastic. And honestly, Norm's Chinese food joke, it's ridiculous, but I loved it a lot. So, a solid episode, a lot of great moments, really thoroughly enjoyed it. Absolutely love Lilith and Frasier. Also really like Frasier and Diane, but not as much as Diane and Sam. To All the Girls I've Loved Before is a really brilliant episode of Cheers.